about joy. And this week we're going to the other end of the spectrum and we're talking about despair. If you remember last week we talked about the fact that we are emotional beings. We have emotions and those emotions are a gift from God. Last week we talked about those emotions that we seek, that we savor, that we enjoy, right? How many of you can name something this week? Because I asked you last week. To practice gratitude this week, to practice joy. So, what gave you joy this week? This is just a review of last week. What did you see that gave you joy this week, or what happened?
Pictures of my grandkids at Lakeside, Ohio.
Pictures of your grandkids.
Taking a scenic drive through Michigan.
Taking a scenic drive through Michigan. Finishing painting the kitchen cabinets. One of the ones for me this week was just driving on the road and seeing all the wildflowers growing along the side of the road. So hopefully you all found moments of joy this week. This week, though, we're going to talk about those emotions that we tend to try to avoid or that we attempt to master because we see them as negatives. If you remember last week, we began by talking about Walter Brueggemann's 3 characterizations of the Psalms. And last week, we talked about the Psalms of praise, the Psalms of orientation. This week, we are going to talk about those Psalms of disorientation, those Psalms that were written during seasons of hurt, that address seasons of hurt, seasons of alienation and suffering and pain and death, those things, those times of life that often evoke rage or resentment or self-pity or even hatred. Today we are going to talk about these Psalms of disorientation, which we tend to call Psalms of lament. These are Psalms of darkness, Psalms of despair. The truth is that all of our lives have trouble in them. If you live very long, you're going to experience trouble. Life is not as well ordered and simple as our Sunday school faith might lead us to believe. Life is a pilgrimage, often through darkness. Life is a pilgrimage through a lot of situations over which we have no control. Think about things like illness, the death of a loved one, poverty and racism and war and gun violence, all of those things. There's a saying that everything happens for a reason, and the truth is, I think that's true, but maybe not in the reason way that people often say it, because often when people say it, they say it meaning that God causes everything to happen for a reason. And to be honest, that's not my theology. My theology says, yes, things happen for a reason. Sometimes that reason is that I'm stupid and do stupid things. Sometimes that reason is that other people do stupid or evil things. Sometimes that reason is just because we live in a broken and imperfect world. Sometimes it's our fault, sometimes it's someone else's fault, and sometimes it's no one's fault at all. A hurricane or an earthquake is not anyone's fault. Most of us can handle the daily ups and downs of life, the normal things that we go through. But what do we do with those times of real despair? Those times when it feels like we are in the bottom of a deep, dark pit with wet, muddy sides that we are never going to be able to climb out of. What do we do with those times of despair when we begin to have feelings of hatred? When we begin to have feelings of anger and fear and a desire for vengeance? These are the Psalms that reflect those parts of our lives. These Psalms were written by our faith ancestors crying out their pain and anger. Now, my guess is most of you, when you go to the Psalms, don't normally go to the Psalms of Lament. They're difficult for us, right? They can be really, really hard because they address emotions and feelings that often we don't want to acknowledge. Some of them, Psalm 69, this is just later in the Psalm that we read. The psalmist says, pour out your indignation upon them, and let your burning anger overtake them. May their camp be a desolation. Let no one live in their tents. Psalm 109 gets even a little more personal. May his children be orphans and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg. May they be driven out of the ruins they inhabit. May there be no one to do him a kindness, nor anyone to pity his orphaned children. And then there's Psalm 137. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against a rock. Those are hard words to read, aren't they? These are words that come from a place of despair. They come from the perspective of the oppressed. And I think that the reason that we have so much trouble with these Psalms is that most of us have never been to that place. Kristen Hanna, in her book, The Nightingale, on the first page says this. She says, if I have learned anything in this long life of mine, it is this. In love, we find out who we want to be. In war, we find out who we are. These Psalms come from a place when we feel that something is horribly wrong or unjust. The sexual abuse of a child, blatant racial discrimination, someone murdering your spouse or betraying their marriage vows, war and genocide. These Psalms are about justice. And we really like questions of justice if we're on the right side. Think about it. Some of the most popular movies are superhero movies, right? The Avengers Endgame. Stories about vigilante justice, Dirty Harry, right? But those are in a controlled situation. What do we do when we are dealing with those feelings? What if you were a mother who fled violence in your own country and got to this border and had your children ripped away from you and you didn't know where they were? What if you were my friend Mindy that I told you about in prayer time, who's afraid to let her teenage son go to parties in the summer with his friends because she's afraid he won't come home? What if you are a father in Syria who has seen his village bombed and destroyed and perhaps all of his family killed? These Psalms are a cry for justice. But here's the twist. In these Psalms, that cry for justice is turned over to God. These Psalms don't condone or cover up or deny the anger or hatred that this person is feeling. But by turning it over to God, it frees that person to let go of it in some way. I've shared this, I know, multiple times. One of my favorite quotes is by Anne Lamott. She says, not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and expecting the rat to die. Carrying around that kind of anger and hatred inside of us will eat us alive. And often, unfortunately, carrying around that kind of anger and hatred inside causes us to lash out and hurt other people. These Psalms acknowledge those feelings, but then also acknowledge God as sovereign. God is the one who has the power to change the situation. And most of these Psalms do acknowledge that God will act. There's this sense of faith that even in this dark pit that I find myself in, God is at work and God will do something. There is a confidence in God's steadfast love. And so these songs are offered as a protest that things are not the way they're supposed to be, and a plea that God would do something about it. But now I have to admit that not all of the songs have that word of hope in the end. Psalm 88 is one especially that recognizes those times when we stay in the pit. Not all problems are resolved, are they? Not everything gets fixed. Sometimes there's no answer, there's no response. Sometimes we enter into a dark night of the soul where it seems that our pain and our suffering go on and on forever. How many slaves in our history in the United States died without ever seeing relief for them or their families? How many parents in this world have lost everything to war? And yet, even in those times when it seems like there's not any answer, the psalmists continue to talk to God. They continue to reach out. All of us experience dark emotions. Life takes all of us through valleys of darkness. And all of us, whether we want to admit it or not, have dark places in our souls. Kristen Hannah in the Nightingale goes on. She says, lastly, though, I find myself thinking about the war and my past, about the people I lost. It makes it sound as if I misplaced my loved ones. They are not lost. They are gone. And as I approach the end of my years, I know that grief, like regret, settles into our DNA and remains forever a part of us. All of us have grief and darkness in some places in our soul. But we often have trouble living in that grief and that darkness. And we try to avoid or deny these feelings. And to be honest, our culture tries to teach us to deny and avoid these feelings. Our own faith tells us that we're supposed to forgive our enemies, right? Jesus prayed for his enemies on the cross. I have preached this very theme, haven't I? You've heard these words out of my mouth. Not that long ago, actually. But now let me ask you a question. Is forgiveness something that happens like that? Is forgiveness something that you can just wake up one morning and say, okay, I forgive, and it's done? We have to wrestle with it. And these Psalms recognize that. Sometimes we're taught that, well, if I complain, that means I'm not faithful. I don't trust God, right? The Bible is filled with people who complain to God. The world tells us that we need to get over our grief. They don't have patience for us to be in a dark place. I have a friend, Julie, whose husband was killed in a car accident when her kids were little, and she grieved and grieved. And I remember people at church actually saying, well, she needs to get over it. It's been a long time now. You know, she needs to move on. You can't control that pain. Sometimes it just stays with you. We don't like to be in these places because it makes us feel vulnerable. It makes us feel weak. And since we don't like these feelings, we do one of a couple of things usually. We either push it down and push it down and push it down and try to ignore it, or we explode and we lash out at other people. Father Richard Rohr says, if we do not transform our pain, we most certainly will transmit it. If we do not transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it, usually to those closest to us, because they're the easiest targets, right? We need these songs to help us recognize our need to deal with our negative emotions. And the church needs to reclaim the practice of lament. For one thing, we as the church need to think theologically about public issues. We need to practice prayer in relationship to public events. Gus Speck, who's an environmental activist, says this. I saw this week, and he said, I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. Those are things that we in the church need to address, and to address specifically through prayer. Through calling out to the one who is capable of changing our culture, bringing about a spiritual transformation. We need to think about these things. We need to think about these things because we need to reflect on the juxtaposition of vengeance and compassion. I am all for vengeance when somebody else hurts me. And I'm all for compassion if I hurt you. Right? But my guess is those calling out for vengeance on us have some real deep hurts. And maybe we need to talk and lament about these things so that we can hear one another's stories and so that we can learn to have compassion on one another. Talking about these deep, dark emotions that we all have, let us know also that we're not alone. There is power in talking through a problem. If you go to a therapist and you've got an issue, what do? You talk it out with them, right? Sometimes just opening up and voicing what's going on inside of us can be a help. There's power in speaking out loud. And if we can't take it to God, who can we take it to? Let me tell you something. No matter what's inside, no matter how dark and ugly it is, you are not going to shock God. God already knows what's in there. But like a parent who cares for their children, God wants us to come and share with Him those things that are on our hearts. God can take it. Everything is appropriate conversation with God. But also, we can lament with others. Psychotherapist Barton Goldsmith says, give your pain a voice and let someone listen. You will be amazed at how much weight will be lifted off your shoulders. You know, just having a couple of people that you can trust, that you can go to and talk through things. But now, let me give you like a word of warning here. Make sure you share in a safe place, in a safe way. You don't walk up to a complete stranger and dump all the darkness that's in your life right out on a stranger, right? People have to earn the right to hear your story. And you have to earn the right with other people to be able to share your story. I mean, you know, you need to find someone who can listen, someone who knows you, someone who can listen without passing judgment or trying to fix things. Because often we don't need somebody to fix it. We just need someone to listen. that we can do that. And sometimes people say things better than I can say them. Actually, a lot of times people say things better than I can say them. But sometimes I come across something that I think, I would like people to hear this in somebody else's voice. So I want you to watch this short video. It's by Brene Brown, and it's about empathy and how we can walk with people who are in a dark place. So hopefully this works. We'll see.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different from sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space where someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Rarely can a response make something better. Connection is what makes it better. When we are in pain, when others are in pain, we need to learn to listen to other people's stories. Not to judge, not to try to make it better and fix it, but to be there. I think of Job's friends sitting with him on the ash heap for 7 days. Things were going really good. And then they open their mouths. And often it's when we open our mouths and try to fix things that things go south. We need to learn to be with each other in those places of pain and darkness. It may not make the floodwaters subside, but it can make us able to bear life's challenges together with God and with each other, even in the midst of the darkness. Would you pray?